This time on Mosaic, I talked to Reverend Doss Sidney, the new president of the Canadian Council of Churches. We discuss how to be an ally to Indigenous communities and the challenges facing the church in Canada coming out of COVID. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm so happy to be talking to my friend, the Reverend Dr. Doss Sidney today. Doss, we've known each other for a long time. We were just trying to figure out how many years it's been. We're not going to say because it's going to date us both, but it has been a long time. So it's always good to see you. Why don't you introduce yourself for people who may not know you?
Oh, well, sure. Thank you, Jennifer. It's so good to be on the show with you. First, let me extend my congratulations to you as the executive director of CBN.
Thank you.
It's been a while already, I know.
It's been a year almost.
For so long we've known you as the managing editor of the Mosaic, which
Yes.
I thought was Canada's premier Christian magazine.
I'm framing that quote, Doss. I'm going to get that framed.
Welcome to appreciate the wealth of your knowledge and leadership. It's natural that you are executive director, of course, now. And, that's wonderful. Well, about myself, it can be a very long story, but let me make it short. I was born in South India, and my first language was actually Tamil, and some people will recognize that language. As part of the Indian diaspora, which spread out all over the world, both my parents were teachers and taught in schools and in teacher training colleges in East and West Africa. And so as a child, I actually grew up in Ethiopia, lived there for 6 years, learned to speak and read and write Amharic, went to Ghana for 8 years, and then came to Canada, to the University of Toronto. And Canada has been my home ever since. And other people can do the math over there about how many years that is exactly. Well, it's Canada is home as no other place for me.
Mm-hmm. And for about the last 18 years, you've been the lead pastor at Highland Baptist Church in Kitchener, and that's how we got to know each other. But I know you have other plans on the horizon, so we'll talk about that in a few minutes. You and I actually worked closely together a few years back when we were working with Gord King, my former colleague, on a resource called Discover. And it's a tool that's still available. It's a tool that we used to help churches to figure out their mission heart. And I remember you always being very passionate, although you're very engaged locally in mission as well. Highland has always been a church that's been engaged locally in the community, but always having a passion for global mission and understanding the importance of global mission for local churches in Canada. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Why do you think it's so important for local churches to be engaged in global mission?
Sure, I'll come to that in a moment. First, can I express a moment of appreciation for Gordon King? His effectiveness and passion for mission and ministry, and his clarity of thought.
Yes.
I know in one of our small groups at our church, we used his powerful book as the study for foundation for our study, Seed Falling on Good Soil.
Oh, brilliant book.
Wonderful book.
Go get it. If people haven't read it, you need to go order it today.
Exactly. It's a terrific book, profound in so many ways. I think global mission gives the church a strong sense of purpose and of unity. And when you have those things together, help. I think it gives a strong foundation for what the church is all about. In terms of mission of the church, we can turn to the mandate in Acts, for example, which says, "You shall be my witnesses in Judea and Samaria and to the uttermost parts of the earth." Or to use today's jargon, mission has to be local, regional, and global. Furthermore, I think it is in the context of human caring that we can really credibly speak of God's love and his caring for us. And I think also in our age of the global village, the scope of our interest and caring has to be global in its reach. Borders, after all, are all of human devising, and oceans are easily crossed these days. I think global mission also has an impact on personal faith. And let me explain. I think suffering can pose such a serious challenge to faith. And people shake their fist at God and say, why doesn't God do something? And I think part of God's answer is to send us. And we fail him and his strategy to respond to suffering. when we do nothing,
Mm.
and we are failing God.
Mm.
And I hope that's not too strong a way to put it. And according to John, the letters of John, if we don't love those we can see, how can we love those? How can we love God whom we cannot see?
Mm. Oh, I love the way that you put that. Yeah, that's beautiful. Das, you have changes coming your way. After 18 years, you're planning to retire from Highland at the end of this year. I know it's going to be hard for the congregation to make that transition. You've been such an important part of leadership at the church. And I know, though, you have other things on your horizon as well. But one of the important things that happened at Highland during your time there was in 2016, the church hosted the Resetting the Relationship Conference. And that was a hugely significant conference for Canadian Baptists here in Ontario. I remember being there and I was so incredibly moved by some of the sessions and the speakers that you had there. And last year, when we were talking on an episode of CBM Calling that we had invited you to be on, you had mentioned about how to be good allies, particularly to Indigenous people. And I think this is a very timely question for us now, isn't it? Just last week, we were recognizing the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Do you see this day as being a positive step forward for our country in seeking reconciliation with Indigenous people?
First, let me talk about the conference for a moment. I remember the conference very well and the strong presence and support of CBM through Androst, whose presence was there as part of our planning committee and so on. And I remember the robust statement from CBM through Terry Smith of repentance and resolution of working towards a better day. And that is, it was such a strong statement, and I was proud to be a Baptist that day. I also remember in that period, the Mosaic came out with an issue committed to First Nations issues, and the stunning art piece on the cover. I put it aside and I said, I'm going to keep that as a memento for all time. I think the art piece was by a First Nations artist, Roy Henry Vickers, and it was just stunning. About being allies, I think the first step is awareness. You know, people have said to me, as we talked about the horror of residential schools or the 60s scoop, they said, we had no idea that these things were happening. And when we think about this day of observance, of truth and reconciliation, I hope it offers people a chance to stop and say, what's this all about? And to learn more about the issues surrounding First Nations and observe the day with humility and sorrow for all that has happened in the past. Such a day, I think, says to all of us, truth and reconciliation are important. Now, people say, well, you know, these things happened so long ago. What relevance are they to us today? But, you know, learning about the past can be both very deeply threatening and enlightening. It's threatening because learning about the past reflects on our identity. It says, this is who we are. And if we have done those things in the past, fallen into those traps and evils so easily, perhaps we can do that again. And, you know, I think back to the traps and evils I mentioned, like the Chinese head tax or the Chinese Exclusion Act, the turning away of the Komagata Maru with immigrants from India in 1914, the rejection of Jewish refugees on the ocean liner, the MS St. Louis in 1939, segregation in Southwest Ontario. We were on a visit recently to Chatham at the Black Mecca Museum, and it was fascinating that there were segregated schools in Ontario until the 60s, or the fact that the poorest untillable land was given to the Black loyalists in Nova Scotia. And as we think about these kinds of inequities and evils, we get a deeper understanding too about present realities. And we are told we have to be therefore on guard and watchful. And when we think about the day, the other word that occurs there, of course, is reconciliation. And reconciliation suggests friendship, and building of relationships wherever possible. To be reconciled is to become the other and to walk in other shoes. So I hope that this day will offer those kinds of abilities for us, which are so rich and helpful to us as a Canadian society.
So you've always been an inspiration to me as a person who was an immigrant to Canada and yet has embraced the idea of knowing our history and accepting responsibility for our past and responsibility to help build a better future. And I often get this question from people who are immigrants to Canada who say, well, why do I need to take any responsibility for the actions of people who were not my ancestors? Why do I have to bear responsibility for Canada's past when I wasn't even living here or my ancestors weren't living here at that time? What would you say to that?
A couple of things. One is, I hope we do a better job of educating people as they come into Canada, so that people are aware of our history and aware of our legacy. And the other thing is that we are beneficiaries of the care First Nations gave to this land. And whether we have come recently or our roots are generations past, we still are beneficiaries. It's sort of like buying a car. You have to be kind of careful. The seller may have lots of money owing on the car, and you as a purchaser has to be careful to make sure that all the liens are gone. And in terms of Canada, there are liens on the land. There are treaties that we have made that have to be observed, and that is part of what Canada is all about.
That's a great analogy. I'm going to use that one next time if somebody asks me that question. So one of the new roles that you're taking on as you prepare for your retirement, obviously you're not slowing down. So in May, I was so pleased to hear this, Joss, and it's wonderful. We offer our sincere support and congratulations to you for becoming the president of the Canadian Council of Churches, which is a hugely important network here of Christian churches in Canada. And the CCC, their mission reads that Christ's call for unity and peace seeks Christ's truth with affection for diversity and acts in love through prayer, dialogue, and witness to the gospel. In a world that is increasingly fractured, sometimes even amongst churches within the same denomination, how have you seen the mission of CCC lived out amongst its members as we work towards more unity with diversity in Christian communities?
That's a profound question. And I think we really need to remember those things that bind us together, to which we are all deeply committed. The tagline for the Canadian Council of Churches is Christ, Community, Compassion. Three powerful words with which we can all agree and wholeheartedly support. Therefore, it's not surprising to me that the Canadian Council of Churches represents 26 different denominations in Canada and 85% of Christians in Canada. And I'm so glad that Western Canada and CBOQ are full members. The CBM is an affiliate member, and we are waiting for the day when the Atlantic Baptists will join.
Yes. Maybe after hearing this, they'll feel peer pressure to join.
I think one of the fears people have is, well, what if the Canadian Council of Churches makes a statement we don't agree with? And one of the beauties of this organization is that we don't make any statement on behalf of the CCC without full agreement of all the member denominations. And that's a very important safeguard. And you mentioned that phrase, affection for diversity. I love that phrase. And I think God must love diversity. I mean, look at us.
Yes, that's right.
Look at the human race.
That's right.
And look at the diversity of God's creatures, great and small. If God loves diversity, so must we. And we must learn to be comfortable with it. That we are all of us, whatever our shape and color, all of us are pilgrims on a journey to be at peace with God and make his kind of world real in our midst. That is what unites us, greater than anything that might divide us. And I think where there are differences of opinion, I think we must seek to understand with a healthy dose of love.
Yeah.
I think that's so important. And today, of course, we have in our church vaxxers and anti-vaxxers and pastors and whatnot. And there too, at one point in my thinking, I thought, well, that's unreasonable of them. But their reasons are also profound, indeed. And we need to approach them also with understanding and with compassion. And that is the way forward.
We seem to live in such a polarized world now. There's just right and there's wrong. There's my way and there's everything else, which must be wrong. And we've stopped listening well. I think listening is a very underrated skill. I think we tend to elevate people who like to speak loudly, but we don't elevate people who listen well to other people. And so I really hope that we'll see that come back into the Christian community, the ability to listen to one another and have forbearance and to be able to be in a posture of learning about things that maybe we're not experts on and maybe we don't know everything about. I always think diversity is really a test of our humility, because it really, when you're with people who are not like you, you realize how much you don't know. Yes. And are we open to that? Do we embrace that in ourselves? I think is probably a question we should ask ourselves daily.
Yes.
So yes, thank you for your perspective on that. I see a lot of challenges ahead for the church in Canada. I'm sure you would say the same, especially coming out of COVID. It has been a really transitional time for many churches, and I know many churches are struggling all over the world, but right here in our own communities as well, here in Canada. What do you think are the greatest challenges facing the church in Canada as we emerge from COVID? Wow. Just an easy question, just throwing an easy question there, Das.
I'll be the prophet for a few moments. Yeah, I think that's a good question for Steve Harvey and Family Feud. The top 5 answers are...
Number 1, Das Sydney.
Well, perhaps I can reflect a little bit on present realities and what they might suggest for the future. I think ministers and people are tired and weary. The last year and a half have been difficult and hard on all of us. And I think we need to make space for people to rest and breathe, to breathe in God's grace and goodness. I think there's a lot of anxiety out there. And in the midst of anxiety, I think it's good for people to turn to the Psalms, for example, and reflect on God's faithfulness and goodness. I was speaking to some pastors and they were saying they have some anxiety about the question, will people come back? Now that they've gotten used to being in their PJs and watching the church service at home, will they make the effort to come physically to church? And then, of course, there's the whole issue of divided communities. And it's a big problem, the vaxxers and anti-vaxxers. Will we, as you mentioned, really listen to each other and understand? There's also the anxiety about what the future holds, the uncertainty about the nature of the church's mission. If there are going to be unending variants, how do we serve our neighborhoods? And there may be a lot of confusion out there about what is most important for the church. But let there be no confusion about this. We are to be a people who love. And with that kind of direction, we cannot go wrong.
Yeah, the mission of the church hasn't changed.
No.
Maybe the delivery system
that's exactly
might be tweaked, but the mission has not changed. So Das, tell us more. Where can we find out more about the work of CCC? It's such important work. It often doesn't get a lot of press, a lot of attention, but it's very important work. So tell us where we can find out more about what CCC is doing.
Jennifer, that's the easiest question you've asked so far.
We're closing with an easy one. We're going to end with a bang.
Just going back a moment, as evangelicals, we stress the Great Commission, we might stress the Great Commandment, but we forget about Jesus' high priestly prayer and the few times in the New Testament where it says Jesus prayed that we might be one. And that's an important directive that we need to remember as well. If you want to learn more about the Canadian Council of Churches, go to the website, councilofchurches.ca, and you'll find a wealth of information there.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a new website too. I'm going to give them a plug. I'm pretty sure that it was a new website that was created this year. So yeah, I hope everybody will go and check it out. Well, thank you so much, Doss. It's always a joy to talk to you. We haven't seen each other in a few years, probably in person, but I'm hoping one day soon we will be able to see each other again, and always a pleasure. You always find there's always so much wisdom in anything that we discuss. So I'm always happy to have a conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.